But we should start. So I just want to start by thanking you, all new and returning Sarasota Strong community members for joining us this evening. My name is Giselle Stolper, and I'm a founding member of SRQ Strong, a lifelong mental health advocate, and a semi-retired mental health professional from New York City living full-time in Manatee County. And I mentioned New York City, you probably will be able to tell from my accent, but I like to just get it out there so everybody knows. I'm tonight's moderator, and it's my pleasure to be tonight's moderator for this very important community conversation called We Need You Here, a community conversation about suicide prevention. But before we start, we mentioned earlier on, and as you could tell, we're live on Facebook, and also we're recording so that people will be able to watch tonight's session at a later date. So I just want to let you know that we are recording, and if you would like not to be recorded, now is a good time to turn off your cameras. So please do that if you prefer. For anyone new to our community, I just want to say a few words about Sarasota Strong in terms of who we are. And Annalise, thank you, or Betsy, for the slide that you put up there. SRQ Strong is a growing group. We grow in leaps and bounds. It seems every month we have additional people coming to our programs. So we're a growing group of Sarasota neighbors who got together several years ago to learn about trauma and its impact on our community, on each of our lives. And while we are local, our roots are local, we now have engaged people in our conversations from across the country and even internationally through our virtual platforms. So we're growing in size, we're growing as a movement, we're growing in the number of people that we are able to reach and who are able to join us in terms of supporting our cause. So as you can see, our mission is to promote community-wide trauma awareness through healing, education, action, and leadership. And our vision is to create a community that cares for itself, and that cares for each other. So if you're interested in becoming a part of our conversations or the other activities that we offer, please feel free to email us. You see our website. If you check our website, you'll see our calendar and a description of the many activities we offer at www.srqstrong.com, or email us. And you'll get this up again. I think you'll see our email address on our website at the end of the presentation if you don't write it down now. So tonight's community conversation is more than a conversation. It's more than a conversation about suicide prevention. It really is a call to action to help spread the word that suicide is preventable.
About suicide prevention.
I'm sorry, I just heard a reverberation. No, sorry. To spread the word that suicide is preventable and that there are steps that we can take as a community to provide help and hope for people who are in emotional distress. The fact is, mental health challenges affect everyone. They affect people across all ages, across races and ethnic lines, economic and income levels. They impact everyone from all walks of life. And sometimes these challenges can feel overwhelming. According to the World Health Organization, every 40 seconds, someone takes their own life. And these numbers are only rising. In the US alone, suicide rates have increased by 35% between 1999 and 2018. And in 2018, suicide was the second leading cause of death by young people ages 10 through 19 here in the US. So the data is clear. Suicide is a growing public health concern. But tonight, it isn't about the data. You can hear a lot about the data, and we probably will touch upon it a little bit later again. But tonight is about people. And it's about people who are courageous enough, and I can't emphasize the word courageous enough, to break the silence and the stigmas that are too often associated with talking publicly about suicide and about mental health problems. By sharing their personal stories, their hope is to let others know, all of you who are joining us tonight, friends, people you care about, to let others know that they're not alone. They're not alone, and to encourage them to seek help and to heal. So tonight you'll hear personal stories, but we're also going to give you a little information that you may find helpful in being able to recognize the warning signs of someone in emotional distress or suicidal risk and where to turn for help. So this evening, you see our featured speakers on the screen. This evening, the first two people you'll hear from will be telling their personal stories about their suicide attempts over the course of their lifetime. There are two people who survived their suicide attempts and come forward to share these experiences tonight to help and give hope to others. Annalise Adams is our first speaker. In her professional life, Annalise is the administrative director of SRQ Strong, a participant in many of our community activities. And those of you who know Annalise know that she is the glue that holds SRQ Strong together. Then we'll hear from Beth Walters. Beth is a suicide prevention peer specialist at Centerstone, which is a nonprofit community mental health agency serving Manatee, Sarasota, DeSoto, and other counties. Beth also co-leads a monthly suicide loss survivors group for NAMI of Sarasota and Manatee. Our third speaker is Brianna Knuth. Brianna is the Director of Client Success for Family Resources of Manatee, and she's the former Director of Centerstone's Suicide Prevention Program. And she's going to be sharing information about warning signs to help recognize in people who may be in emotional distress. And our fourth and final speaker is Charles Kniff. Charles is a retired Sarasota County Sheriff's Office lieutenant and a former commander of the field training unit. He was also a board member for NAMI Manatee Sarasota for many years, and is currently a certified course instructor in both mental health first aid and psychological first aid, and teaches these courses all over our community. And Charles will be sharing information about local resources, available resources that you can turn to. So let's get on with our conversation. And Annalise, if you would start us off, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Giselle. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate you being here. My name is Annalise Adams. I'm 31 years old and I am a suicide survivor. I was 15 when I first attempted suicide, and this is actually the first time that I'm publicly talking about it. It's not something that I actually started to actively and consciously heal from until recently. My story probably sounds quite like a lot of other people's stories out there. I come from what is considered a broken home. I'm a middle child from a low-income family. We moved around quite a lot. My dad came and went. My parents eventually married, separated, and then divorced, and my mom was left raising 3 children essentially alone. I remember there was always tension in our house, usually between me and my dad, or my mom and my dad, or most notably my brother and my dad, which would lead to law enforcement and CPS getting involved in some cases. My father's initial reaction to most situations was intimidation and anger. and my mom's was tears and guilt. So I quickly became a combination of all of that and more. I had no idea how to process my emotions. I had no coping mechanisms. I didn't even know what those were. Growing up, I never really felt like I fit in, though I always had friends growing up. But one of the things I realize now is that I was really good at putting on a mask and faking it. So when I started high school, I had a new group of friends, I had boyfriends, I excelled academically and in extracurricular activities. I was a freshman competing on varsity teams. I was even training to hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail with my classmates. So I wasn't what people thought a typically depressed and anxious child looked like. Not to mention that in my family, and especially 16 years ago, any talk of mental health or depression meant that there was something wrong with you. My mom came from a very conservative Christian home. She had experienced her own traumas, but you didn't talk about them. My father had a very suck it up and rub some dirt in it mentality. You know, he jokes now watching that 70s show that Red Foreman was his father, you know, that angry war vet who called everyone a dumbass, including his children. So that kind of, you know, spread into my father's parenting style. But, you know, my parents didn't have any control over the programming they received, nor did I. So even though I continue to wear my mask, you know, deep down, I knew something was wrong. I remember feeling like I didn't belong, either in my family, with my friends, or on this planet for that matter. I felt like I was making things worse for the people around me. I felt like I was a burden. I felt a lot of pressure in my home and just from life in general. I felt alone and I felt hopeless, like I couldn't truly talk to people about how I was feeling. Both my older brother and I had run away on multiple occasions, and I remember one time after a huge explosion, our parents sent us to our room, and I decided I was going to pack my bag and I was going to leave. I was going to run away. And I did just that. I packed a bag and I walked straight out the door. And at the time, the house we were living in, our dining room table faced the front door, and my mom was sitting at the head of the table watching the front door as I walked out. I walked 6 or 7 miles to my friend's house. And when I got there, I told her mom what had happened. And she was like, you know, you can stay here. Just call your mom and make sure she knows that you're okay. So I called my mom. And when my mom answered the phone, she was like, why are you calling me from your room? And she had no idea that I had been gone for hours, let alone ran away. It was not long after that incident that I came home from school one day and my mom was asleep in her room. She suffered from chronic migraines. She had also been raising 3 children in the same home of an emotionally and verbally abusive partner who she was in the process of divorcing. So this was not an uncommon state for her. My parents had a full medicine cabinet, and from that, I took an industrial bottle size of aspirin. I counted out 10 piles of 10 and just laid them on my bed and stared at them. I remember feeling numb and exhausted. I knew my parents had took these when they were in pain, so I figured if I had just taken enough, that all of this emotional pain that I was in would just go away. So I swallowed them in handfuls. I sat on my bed and didn't really know what to do with myself. So in true fashion of faking it, I woke my mom up and I asked her to just take me to my friend's house so we could hang out. She had no idea what I had done at the time. So she dropped me off, and when I was at my friend's house, less than an hour, she could tell something was wrong. And I told her, you know, I think I made a mistake. I swallowed a bunch of pills and I'm starting to feel lightheaded. And she instantly, you know, tried to help me to get me to throw up, and it wasn't working. So she told her parents and they immediately drove me to Sarasota Memorial Hospital. Once I was there, I remember people rushing all around me. I was given activated charcoal to get my body to naturally flush all of the toxins. I remember slipping in and out of consciousness and glimpses of my family coming in and out of the room. There were swirls of doctors and lots of chatter. And then I remember next thing I know, I was in an ambulance being transferred to the ICU at All Children's Hospital in St. Pete, where they could better monitor my critical state. At this point, I remember just wanting all of the chaos to end and to go home, but I was far from being able to go home. They told my mom that they were Baker acting me, and I would spend the next several days at Bayside Center for Behavioral Health. Once I was there, I saw numerous doctors, had family counseling sessions where my mother and I both denied that I was depressed, that it was just the divorce going on at home and lots of life pressures just boiling, hitting that boiling point. I didn't want anyone thinking there was anything wrong with me. I just wanted to go home and I wanted everything to go back to normal. I eventually was released with a recommendation that I continued going to talk therapy. And I did go for a couple of sessions and I remember hating it. I also remember asking my mom and pleading with my mom, I don't want to go anymore. I'm fine. I'll never do what I do again. Just don't make me go. And to my surprise, I didn't have to go anymore. And I thought I won that battle. But what I didn't realize was my dad had actually lost his job, which meant that we lost health coverage, which meant my family could no longer afford my continued treatment. And that was essentially that. I went back to my life and people walked on eggshells around me for a while, but eventually everyone stopped talking about it. No one brought it up, what's done is done and that's that. And I had also accepted that, at least on the outside. I may have had an outward appearance of resistance to any help or that I needed help, but internally something had subconsciously shifted in me. When I was at Bayside, I remember in one of the family sessions, the case manager shared a story about Buddha that stuck with me. And it honestly changed my entire life. When I was released, I got home and my mom had a little Buddha statue waiting for me. And I still have it to this very day. Sorry, I didn't think I would get emotional holding that up. But I really held on to this story and this little nugget of wisdom, and I really think it saved my life. And that little Buddha is actually what prompted me this time last year, actually, to request all of my records from that time. I remembered what my 15-year-old brain wanted me to remember, but, I wanted to see how close to reality it really was. And I was surprised to find that I remembered quite a lot. And it brought back all sorts of emotions to read the ER reports. I saw the doctor's notes about all of my vitals and the level of toxins, the correspondence about the urgency to get me to St. Pete, the doctor's notes about me being flat and guarded while at Bayside, the notes from the case manager that she had told the patient about the Buddha story. She actually wrote that down. I also read that I was suffering from adjustment disorder and major depression and anxiety. No one had ever really sat down and explained to me what depression or anxiety or any of that stuff was, what mental health was. So as a kid, I had immediately rejected all these assumptions that people had about me. But there was major relief in going back and exploring this period of my life now as an adult, talking to my mom, talking to my sister and my friends about what I was going through and how I remember everything and how I still live with depression and anxiety. But it also brought me major closure, and like talking about it over the past couple of years and like now tonight has lifted a huge weight off of my shoulders. I know my time is coming to an end, so I just want to wrap up. I can't really explain how good it feels to tell someone how you really feel and be met with compassion and authenticity rather than judgment and fear. Nothing makes you feel more hopeless than feeling like you can't express yourself to the world around you. It's never too late to start healing, and know that healing is a lifelong journey. It's not a one and done thing. It's just what healing looks like. It's changed for me and how it's grown for me. It gets better and better every year, and I learn more about myself every year. I now have the knowledge and awareness of what I'm going through and how to get myself out of it, how to sit with my emotions and process them in a healthy way. I have an amazing support system I feel safe confiding in. I have coping mechanisms, and the most important thing is, that I have hope. If I had felt as confident back then as I do now about being open and vulnerable, I may have never been in the position I was in.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Annalise, so much. I think if we could all look back and things that back at another time in our life and done things differently, it's great to be able to do that, but it's so important that you can now. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's hard for me to stop people, to stop you, because your story is so powerful and so meaningful to what we want to discuss tonight. So as we move now to Beth, we'll hold questions. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put it in the chat, and I promise we'll come back around to the chat and go through the list. But I'd like to just continue to be able to move through the presentations at this point. So hold your questions, please. So Beth, if I could turn to you now, please.
Yes. Thank you to SRQ Strong and all of the community for inviting me to speak here. And I also just want to personally say thank you to Annalise. I felt myself getting emotional at times listening to you speak. So definitely thank you for being so vulnerable. And I can relate to a lot of the things that you said. So my struggles with mental health began in my preteen years when I was in middle school. I can remember a lot of stress and depression really starting when I was around 12 years old. I come from a family of 7 children, and I'm the oldest, which to me meant that I carried the responsibility of setting the example for the younger kids. I remember I often had arguments with my parents because of this, and I didn't really have a lot of support to openly talk about my feelings. So I kept a lot of things bottled up inside of me. I started to cope with the stress with self-harm, and I often hid my cuts and scars because I didn't want anyone to know, because I did feel a lot of shame behind the pain that I felt. And there was too much stigma at the time. The conversation about mental health was not the same that it is today, which I think led to my parents taking the approach that they did. And it wasn't just something that was talked about in my environment. They didn't really know who to turn to. And I was also raised with the saying, don't air your dirty laundry, which really led me to feeling shameful about the suicidal thoughts that started to form in my head. I remember having a journal, which I would write about how much I wanted to die and how much I wanted pain to end. One entry, I remember writing a letter to God, telling him to please take me away from Earth, and in return, I would be the babysitter for him, for all of the little kids who had become angels in heaven, because I felt like it would be less painful up there than it was here. The first time I attempted suicide, I was 12 or 13, by hanging myself with the bathrobe from the top of my bed frame, but no one knew about that those few times. And there had been a couple of times after that I had reattempted, but the worst really was when right after my 15th birthday, I had just started a new school year, and I was questioning a lot of things in my life. I had played on the school basketball team, but I wasn't happy on the team because a few of the girls there had made fun of me throughout the previous season, and I just didn't feel like I belonged there, and it didn't feel like it was something good to go and do. And during that time at the beginning of the school year, I also was contemplating suicide throughout the first few months, which was really making it even harder to stay connected to anything. I ended up quitting the basketball team and really began to isolate myself from my friends, because I thought, who needs friends if you're not alive? Later at night, throughout those few months, after everyone was in bed, I would Google on my laptop, how I could kill myself for real. And that was hard because that's not readily, information, which I'm glad it's not. And so I went down this really, really dark rabbit hole on the internet of ways to die. And I meticulously planned my attempt. And I had a lot of anger and resentment towards my parents for the fighting, which, you know, to this day I can gladly say isn't there any longer. But, you know, the emotional intelligence of a 15-year-old isn't of what I have today. So I starved myself of food and water for 3 days. And then on the third day, I took dozens and dozens of ibuprofen along with a half a dozen or so of sleeping pills. And then I wrote a short note saying goodbye, and then another like will of a 15-year-old saying what I wanted done with a few $100s I had saved and my clothes, my stuffed animals. And then I went to sleep. And I thought that was my time. And obviously, since I'm speaking here today, that wasn't the case, thankfully. It was a really long road to recovery and being able to speak to anyone. Eventually, I did speak to a school guidance counselor months later. I was put into therapy during those months later by my parents. I was formally diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which then was changed to bipolar depression. And the long road to recovery really did begin to get to where I am today. And to anyone here who is struggling with suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation, I just want you to know that I see you and I hear you. And I know how hard it is to feel alone and that you might not be sure who you can turn to, but I promise you that hope and help are real. It's out there. Your life matters and we need you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth and Annalise, both of you. You know, I don't know if you can see what's being posted in the chat, but people are all responding and thanking you for having the courage and being so brave to share your stories with us tonight and with everybody tonight. You are an inspiration really for health and for healing and for encouraging people to come forward and that they're not alone. So we thank you, both of you, for your stories tonight. And now I'd like to move on to Brianna. And so we're going to change pace a little bit, which is somewhat difficult after listening to these powerful stories. But it's also, I think, important for people to know that you can help. And there are ways to help identify when another person is in emotional distress, and there are things that you can do. And so we're going to shift a bit to that focus for the next two speakers. So Brianna, if you would mind going next, please.
Yes, thank you, Giselle, and huge thank you to Annalise and to Beth. How brave of you and how inspirational for you both to share your stories.
Yes.
It really puts all of this information in perspective, and I know that you will hear during Charlie and my portions of the presentation, you'll hear a lot of things that both Beth and Annalise have touched on throughout, telling us their stories. So just my encouragement to everybody is just to be very intentional with listening to that information and being able to put these pieces together, because you really do, like Giselle said, you can help. There are things that you can look for. There are things that you can do. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen to your gut. So we're going to be talking a lot about some various things to look for and things to watch out for. So if we, Betsy has, there we go. You took the words out of my mouth. Well, without words, you know what I mean. Okay, I'll just skip over that blank one. That's fine. Or I guess you're gonna do it for me.
Are you good, Mom?
Good. I just need to stop sharing and reshare.
That is fine. I'm gonna go ahead and get started while you get that pulled up, Betsy. Thank you. Okay, so as Giselle said, opening the presentation, my name is Brianna Knuth, and I am the Director of Client Success at Family Resources here in Manatee County. I just started this role within the last 3 weeks. So prior to my brand new role, I was the Suicide Prevention Project Director at Centerstone. And today I'm here to talk about risk factors and warning signs for suicide, as well as prevention strategies. So before we dig into this information, again, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's on this call. Suicide prevention is absolutely a community responsibility. Everyone has a part to play, and by taking the time to participate in this conversation, you're doing your part. Continuous attention, education, and action are all steps that are of utmost importance for suicide prevention. Next slide, please. Suicide is a major public health issue. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the 8th leading cause of death in the state of Florida, and has been for multiple years. The impact of suicide is far-reaching. Both death by suicide and suicide attempts cause serious emotional, physical, and economic impacts and affect the well-being and health of friends, loved ones, coworkers, and our community. Each of us has the opportunity to shine a light on those living in darkness. And suicide is preventable, but we must act in order to make an impact. There are many things that we can look for and notice in others and ourselves that can suggest the need for more support. There are also numerous risk factors that have been linked with increasing a person's likelihood to either consider or die by suicide. And please know that this does not mean that these are considered direct causes. It's important to remember that suicide does not discriminate. People of all genders, ages, and ethnicities can absolutely be at risk. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into discussing risk factors. And again, I would like everyone to remember that while there is no single cause of suicide, risk factors are things that we can notice in ourselves and others that can indicate the need for more support. Next slide. A prior suicide attempt is one of the main risk factors associated with suicidal behavior. Previous suicide attempts have been actually the strongest predictor of future suicide attempts. Also, a feeling of hopelessness can be another driving factor for suicidal ideation, specifically in those who struggle with a mood disorder, especially depressive disorders. Hopelessness has been considered a cognitive vulnerability associated with the risk of suicide. It's an emotion characterized by a lack of optimism, hope, and passion. Someone who feels hopeless may often have no expectation of future improvement or success. Essentially, this person feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Another risk factor is impulsive or aggressive tendencies. Impulsive tendencies can impact decision-making, as we know, acting quickly with no thought to the potential resulting consequences. The action is focused on nothing beyond that exact moment in time. Another big risk factor is easy access to lethal means. Restricting access to lethal means that individuals can use to attempt suicide continues to be one of the most successful strategies in preventing suicide. And the term lethal is important here because some methods are simply more harmful and destructive than others. In the United States, just over half of all suicides are completed by firearms. So things like safe storage, including the use of safes, trigger locks, storing ammunition in separate locations, temporary alternative placement of firearms, amongst other strategies, have been and should continue to be heavily promoted in both clinical and community settings to decrease easy access. Same goes for medications. Never keeping lethal doses of medications on hand, keeping medications locked in a safe place, and properly disposing of medications that you don't need anymore are some steps that everyone can take to reduce the risk of overdose. A message that we heavily promoted at Centerstone was that decreasing access to lethal means is like taking the keys away from somebody who's been drinking. It reduces bad outcomes in high stress situations. Last one on this list, mental health conditions, particularly clinical depression and other mood disorders, have been identified as one of the most common risk factors associated with suicidality. According to the CDC, Almost half of the people who died by suicide in 2018 had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD, and borderline personality disorder are some other mental health conditions that have been associated with the risk of suicide. Next slide, please. Difficult life challenges are also associated with risk. The end of a relationship, loss of employment, death of a friend or family member, and financial turmoil are some examples. However, it's notable that what may be considered a difficult life challenge for one person may differ from the next. These may be precipitating factors that can trigger suicidal crisis. Barriers to accessing mental health and substance abuse treatment, or perceived barriers, is another risk factor. Wait time, insurance, financial barriers, and as well as physical distance from providers, are real hurdles for some. However, there's always help available. It's just about finding it. That's why knowing community resources, knowing treatment providers, and knowing who can help are very important. Another very real risk factor is stigma associated with seeking mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, or treatment for suicidal thoughts. And as we all know, there is a definite under-recognition of the importance of mental health in our community. We must continue to fight this stigma. Talking about mental health, educating yourself and others, remaining conscious of the language that we use to talk about these topics, and showing compassion for those who are struggling are some of the ways that we can all continue this fight. It's okay to not be okay, but no one deserves to feel like they're in this alone. No one should have to feel like they need to suffer in silence. Seeking treatment for mental health should be normalized just as it is for seeking treatment for physical health. Cultural or religious beliefs can also be associated with risk. Some cultures recognize suicide as a noble resolution of a personal dilemma. For example, also historical trauma suffered by American Indians and Alaska Natives, such as resettlement and the destruction of cultures and economies, have contributed to high suicide rates in this population. Next slide, please. Alcohol and substance abuse problems, or substance use problems rather, contribute to suicidal behavior in several ways. Persons who are dependent on substances also or often have a number of other risk factors that are associated with suicide risk. And in addition to being depressed, they're also likely to have social and financial problems. Substance use and abuse can be common to people who are prone to be impulsive and among persons who engage in many types of high-risk behaviors that result in self-harm. Next one is history of trauma, which is also associated with a high risk of suicide. It's important to note again here that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. As with life challenges discussed earlier, what might be considered traumatic for one might be viewed differently for the next. Trauma can result from so many different things, including natural disasters, victimization and severe psychological abuse, physical assault, including both sexual assault, domestic violence, bodily injury, serious accidents, exposure to homicide, suicide, and other fatalities, as well as devastating interpersonal losses. Effects of trauma that may increase suicide risk include anxiety, depression, hopelessness, despair, anger, social isolation, and so many more. Next is family history. Family history of suicide has been found to be another potential risk factor. Some individuals may be genetically predisposed to certain characteristics or tendencies. Family psychiatric history should not be disregarded because it can help to identify people who may be vulnerable to mental disorders or conditions associated with suicide risk. Family history of exposure to other risk factors for suicide, like trauma, for example, should also be considered. And last one, local clusters of suicide and unsafe exposures to others who have died by suicide in either personal lives or via the media. I'm kind of going to focus on the media here a little bit more. Risk of suicide can increase when media fails to follow best practices, including dramatic or graphic headlines or images, repeatedly reporting on the same suicide, explicitly describing the suicide method or showing pictures of it, dramatizing the suicide death through romanticized and sensational headlines, or showing the site of the suicide or pictures of those who are grieving. The media is a big part of our lives, as we all know, and they can play a huge role in actually preventing suicide risk or deaths by providing information about warning signs of suicide risk, providing resources to get help, including both national and local hotlines, sharing messages of hope and resilience, and engaging experts to provide facts about suicide and how to prevent it. Next slide, please. Research has found that being in debt or facing financial crisis or unemployment, past homelessness, and having lower income have each been associated with suicide attempts. And in our current world, it's important to recognize that as financial stressors do play a role in suicide, this needs to be recognized even more in the light of the unprecedented financial instability that has been triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Next is incarceration, or being in prison or jail, and legal problems are considered risks. Suicide is a threat to all persons involved in the corrections department. The rates of inmate suicide are far higher than the national averages, and even still higher for special populations, including juvenile populations, as well as the LGBTQ community. And even corrections officers have a much greater occupational suicide rate. Stress resulting from prejudice or discrimination, such as family and social rejection, bullying, violence, all of these increase risk for suicide, especially among LGBTQ youth. According to the CDC, actually, the LGBTQ youth population have seriously contemplated suicide at almost 3 times the rate of heterosexual youth, and are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And in a national study, 40% of transgender adults reported having made a suicide attempt. Next, serious medical illness, including but not limited to, of course, conditions like back pain, sleep disorders, and traumatic brain injuries have been found to be at increased risk of suicide. Widespread suicide prevention efforts in all healthcare settings is warranted. And last, we have social isolation, which is absolutely a major risk factor for suicide. The feeling of not belonging or feeling not connected to other people can be detrimentally powerful. Being alone and having little interaction with others wears on your well-being. And in the midst of this pandemic, the very tactic that health experts say is saving lives, social and physical distancing, could also actually be increasing the risk of suicide for some people. People need to feel connected. We need to have a sense of belonging, and it's important to encourage connection even in the face of a pandemic. So some might need to be a little creative, but isolation for an extended period of time just is not healthy. Next slide, please. Okay, would you mind turning on that light? Thank you. Okay, sorry, I think it might be a little dark in here. There we go. Okay, so now that we have summarized numerous characteristics or conditions that can increase the potential for someone to increase or experience suicidal thoughts, I'm going to move into some warning signs, which these are things that we can look out for that might indicate that you or someone else is at immediate risk of suicide. And I'm going to break these down into 3 different categories.
And Brianna, if you could try to wrap up for the next 5 minutes, please.
Okay.
Okay.
I will.
Thank you.
I will. Okay, so next slide, please. So these are the talk warning signs. So talking about wanting to die or kill oneself, talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live, talking about feeling like a burden to others, and talking about feeling trapped or in unbearable pain. Next slide, please. Some behavioral warning signs: increasing substance use, looking for ways to kill oneself, such as researching methods online or obtaining a firearm, withdrawing from activities, isolating from family and friends, sleeping too much or too little, saying goodbye to friends and family, giving away important possessions, and showing aggression, or behaving recklessly. Next slide, please. Mood. Got some, there we go. Displaying extreme mood swings or acting out of character, depression, anxiety, and or irritability, loss of interest, humiliation or shame, or relief or sudden improvement. This could actually indicate that someone has come to terms with their death and this making the decision to die and therefore experiencing relief. Next slide, please. Okay, again, everyone has a part to play in preventing suicide. If you are concerned about someone, assume that you're the only one that's going to reach out. Don't assume that someone else is going to take care of it. Don't ignore red flags when you see them. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some prevention strategies that we can actually all engage in. Start the conversation. Have an honest conversation with someone. Talk to the person in private and listen to their story. Ask directly if they're thinking about suicide. One of the most common myths revolving around suicidal thoughts is that if you ask somebody if they want to kill themselves, you're putting the idea in their head. And this is absolutely not true. Don't beat around the bush. Ask directly, calmly, and without judgment. Show understanding and take their concerns seriously. Remove the stigma, normalize mental health treatment, and encourage them to seek treatment. And my computer's gonna die. There's a phone down there behind me. Know the resources and how to connect. In the next portion of the presentation, Charlie will be sharing some local resources and providers with you. Know what to look for. So all of the risk factors and warning signs that we've talked about. Don't ignore significant changes in mood or behavior. Next, be there, be supportive. Tell them that you care about them, that they're not a burden and that they are loved. Let them know that their life matters to you. Reduce access to means of self-harm. Engage in training, stay educated, and just know that you never know when one question or one conversation could save a life. Again, take the person seriously. Listen to your gut. If you're not sure what to do, please reach out to someone who can help. And if you are struggling, don't wait for someone to reach out. Seek mental health treatment and tell your clinician about your suicidal thinking if you have one. Treat yourself like you would treat someone who needs your help.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brianna. It's a lot of information. You know, a lot of information to take in, and I'm sure people are going to have questions. And I think Charlie next, or Charles, will reinforce some of what you've already kind of shared with the group and add about resources. So Charlie, you're our last speaker.
Thank you very much, Giselle. First, I want to say thank you to Annalise and Beth for sharing their stories. It takes a lot of courage to come out and talk about events in your life that a lot of people don't understand how you got there, don't understand why you did what you did. And it's wonderful to see that you're at a point where this is cathartic to talk to us. Thank you, Brianna, for pointing out some of the things. And I want to just kind of wrap this up a bit. We have slides that go with this, and we'll get the slides up for you in a few minutes. But you know, please understand is that what we're talking about is the signs of what's outward that you're going to see in the behaviors of the person. Think of it as a stop sign or a street sign. It might be very cop of me to say that, but that's an easy way for you to see it. You're going to see a change. The symptoms that we were mentioning and then the stories that Annalise and Beth told about their where they were, is that was what they were feeling and what they were saying. And all too often, I hate to say it, and I'm going to have a visual for you, is that all too often the feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness are there. We are seeing what's going on, but we're too busy doing this right now to pay attention. Too many people are so caught up that we're no longer looking after each other. And I took some notes down and things like that, because what I'm going to lead into is then just how do you respond when you do get to the point where you ask the question and someone says, yes, I am thinking of suicide. But I wanted to point out some things that I think were important to bring out from the stories that we heard and what was brought out. For Annalise's story, one of the things is that she said she puts on a mask, or she had put on a mask. And that mask goes directly to the stigma that we have, is that, and Beth said it, and it was a phrase in my own family, you know, we don't air our dirty laundry outside for people to see it. You have to push back on that. If you have friends, if you have, quote, loved ones, people that you're interacting with, you have to be prepared to say, hey, what's going on? And mean it, and ask that question, and then get to that point of going, hey, you know what? Are you thinking of hurting yourself? And it's important that you use the words, are you thinking of hurting yourself, or are you thinking of committing suicide? I don't know what I just started doing here, but oh, that's Betsy. Thank you for sharing that screen, Betsy. I believe it's slides 17 is where we need to be. So you need to make sure that you ask that question. That is so important that is there. Push back on that helplessness and hopelessness. And again, as Beth said, she mentioned that. And I want to get to what Brianna said, which I think was one of the most important things, or she said several important things, but one of the most things is that the trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And too often we are looking at other people's situations and we are making a judgment based upon how we would respond and how we feel we would be affected by the situation. And that is totally wrong. First of all, you're not Annalise, you're not Beth, you're not the person that's gotten to that point where they have felt that they have endured enough pain and they want that pain to end. That's what it is. Suicide isn't always about dying. It's about ending the emotional pain that the person is in, and they cannot see how they can do it. They're helpless. There's nothing that they think that they can do or anyone can do to change the situation. So that makes them hopeless. Nothing can be done. And sometimes they feel worthless. In other words, you know what? This is all my fault. I deserve this. And I'm not worth anything else. And I have to tell you, if you're out there, if you're feeling suicidal, if you've got these thoughts, please remember is that we do need you here. That's number one. And everyone is unique. It's not just fingerprints. It's not just irises. Everyone is unique. Okay. And everyone contributes. And if you're struggling and you just haven't found your way to contribute, give it time. If you've tuned in, whether it's on Facebook Live or whether it's on the Zoom meeting here, that's a good sign, whether you yourself are feeling depressed and down, or whether you think you know someone that's there. If we can get you to just move in that direction of paying attention. The other thing is forgiveness. Whatever you may or may have not done and how you're taking it on, use the wisdom of our life expectancy and know that you can get to a point of forgiveness, whether it's against somebody who treated you unfairly and that's bringing you down, or whether it's something that you've done. And that's not a religious forgiveness. It's just that you can do this inside for your own wellness. Okay, so that's what I took away from the beginning of the slides. For you guys, pretty much when someone says to you that, hey, I'm feeling suicidal, it's going to be a punch. And it may very well be a gut punch. Now, if you're paying attention, maybe not. Maybe you'll be say, okay, Charlie, yeah, we could see that, you know what, your physical demeanor had changed. So we saw signs. We could see, based upon what you were saying, that you were tired or that you had trouble getting out of bed, that we saw signs that you were expressing symptoms are there. But in most cases, it's going to be a gut punch to you, and you're going to have to respond, because you're going to ask the question, you're not thinking of hurting yourself, are you? You're not thinking of taking your own life. And I want you to not ask it in a situation where you answered the question, which is what I just did. Because when you say things like, you're not going to, you're giving that person the answer. What I want you to do is say, Charlie, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are things so bad, Charlie, that you're thinking of killing yourself? And then you're going to fall right back to what the title of this presentation is Charlie, I don't want you to do that. And you're going to use I statements. And you're going to say, because we need you here. Now, my slides are up. And obviously some stuff you learned in kindergarten and everything, always be respectful and genuine manner. If someone is upset with their own life and they can't end the pain, you're going to have to take a deep breath and be in control of yourself. You're not going to be able to get angry with them. That's not going to do anything. That's not going to further them along the path to recovery. If anything, it's going to push the stigma towards them. Okay. You can be shocked, but you have to respond in a controlled manner. You can't be, oh my God, what's going to happen? Or any of whatever God, we're supposed to leave religion out of it, whoever you pray to, whoever it is, oh, Mr. President, whatever, okay? You have to remain in some type of control. So remember to breathe. Remember that it's not about you. This is extremely important. I'm depressed because I'm getting a divorce. Oh, well, you know, your wife isn't as bad as my wife, or my lawyer cost me X amount. That's not going to make me feel good about the fact that I feel like there's nothing I can do in my life and you survived yours. If anything, your example is going to make me feel oftentimes worse, because guess what? I couldn't even meet up to you, my friend. So don't argue with them beyond the point of saying that I do not want you to do it. That's the only argument that is authorized for you to have with them. You'd be willing to listen, but the only argument you have is, I don't want you to do it. Well, what about this? What about that? Don't get into a circle conversation. You're going to want to encourage help. Self-help, if they're at the very beginning, absolutely. Professional help preferred. And not all professional help ends up being someone taking into protective custody or someone spending time under the Baker Act. All right. Now, the bottom sentence says, get information by conversing with the person. And I put that in there because of these. You might be having a conversation with somebody on the phone, or like on Facebook Live, you may be going back and forth. Get information by conversing with the person. Find out what it is that's bothering them. Find out whether or not they've decided, when you ask them that question, have they got the means to carry out their plan? Because as we go through and you get answers to these questions, it increases the need for you to possibly get a higher level of response beyond you. So some of the questions that you want to ask to get information from the person is, have you wished you were dead or wished you could go to sleep and not wake up? Those are what we call passive statements of possibly being suicidal. Have you actually had any thoughts about killing yourself? So if you get a yes to that answer to that question, okay, then you're at a higher level than have you wished you were dead or wished you could go to sleep and not wake up. There's always natural responses of being depressed based upon the situations that are occurring in one's life. That happens. How long should you be depressed if your dog dies? Well, some people consider their dog to be a member of the family, and some people consider the dog to be property that runs around the farm. It depends. There's no set answer. Okay. But when you start to get to that second question about, have you had thoughts? Hopefully no one's killing themselves over their dog. But when you start to get to that, we've now moved a stage. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that some of the things and signs that you'll see that Brianna mentioned, some of the symptoms that might be expressed may be perfectly normal for the situation that they're in. But if you don't ask, if you don't get your information through conversation, then you won't know. The third question that's extremely important to ask is, have you thought about how you might kill yourself? Have you thought about how you might harm yourself? You have to be prepared to ask these tough questions, because that's going to tell you where they're at and what type of response we need. And I mentioned it earlier, some people, maybe in the very beginning, you might say, well, listen, you know, there's some self-help books, or there's a podcast that you can go to, or NAMI, which is one of our resources. But when it starts to escalate through these questions, you may need to get a higher response. And someone who has thought about a plan is talking about, or how they might do this, is talking about their means. As Brianna said, lethal means are more effective. And in our statistics, men use lethal means more often than women do. And Giselle said it, and it's very true, is, you know what, everyone has a right to own a firearm and the Second Amendment and all of that. I'm not going to say anything like that, but you know what, you also need to be responsible. And if you're paying attention to your life and what's going on, being responsible means following some of those recommendations that Giselle talked about with safeguarding your firearms and safeguarding your weapons in your house. Thank you. So here are the questions as we're working through them. Thank you. I wasn't going to tell you to flip the slide, but thank you very much. So now we're here. Have you had any intention of acting on these thoughts or killing yourself as opposed to thoughts, but you definitely would not act on them? And you notice here that we put these categories, these questions in high risk. I would say at this point in time, if you're engaging with someone, you are absolutely calling family and friends. You are absolutely calling a doctor. And you may be at the point where you are calling 911, depending upon the answers that you're getting. This person may require a stabilization. Remember that if someone gets taken into protective custody, they do not get full treatment. This is to stabilize them and get them past the crisis so that they do not harm themselves or harm others. And then hopefully everybody leaves. And when we get to the resources, everybody leaves the resources with a treatment plan. And it would then be incumbent upon you, friends and family, who are aware of this situation, to help support them and help them follow through with that. Obviously, question 5, have you started to work out or worked out the details of how to kill yourself? Do you intend to carry out this plan? Yes is beyond most persons' capabilities. So if you get a yes, you're calling 911. Most often in my experience, both as a police officer and personally and professionally, when that answer is yes, an ambulance is coming, 911 is coming, because the person has taken some act, whether it's a physical act or some type of threat to where they're ready to do this. And question 6, have you done anything or started to do anything or prepared to do anything to end your life? Absolutely. Have you collected pills, obtained the guns, whatever it is that you've done? On those things that are there, I want to point away things like giving valuables away. And I want to mention just another thing is that sometimes you will see a change in the person. So first of all, giving away valuables is a key thing to look for. I have a pocket knife that I carry. I've had it for several years. People have often commented on it and said, oh, that's a nice knife. If I were to turn around and give that to somebody, that would indicate that I no longer expect to use it because I no longer expect to be here. Now, a lot of people might see that as, being, the words escape me, just being nice and giving something away and saying, oh, okay, you know, how nice, Charlie's doing that for somebody who didn't have a knife, that's nice. But what that really is, and if you start to see changes in those signs and symptoms that Brianna mentioned, is that I might be at peace with the decision. When I teach this course, I teach it and I call it the Suicide Connect, is that the person's pain and suddenly they've decided, okay, suicide is the answer. And that connection now gives me a light at the end of the tunnel. It gives me a way to where I say, oh, okay, much like Beth said, okay, was that I took the pills and I thought I would lay down and I would then suddenly be making my pact with God to look after all the angels and take care of everybody. He was at peace with the decision because they knew that the pain would end. That's what you have to be wary of. You have to make sure that you are paying attention to that. And that if you see that sudden change, which we often take of, oh, Charlie's feeling better, I don't have to worry anymore. It oftentimes is the exact opposite. And that might be the most crucial time for you to go to Charlie, and I'm just using my name, and say, Charlie, Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of harming yourself? Why do you ask? Well, I ask because, you know, you were pretty depressed about everything that was going on in your life just a few days ago, and now you're happy, you're giving things away. What's changed? Okay, and then you go from there. We can flip to the next slide on that. So, seeing as I fully expect that there'll be questions in the chat, or at least I hope so, if we don't run too long. Here are some of the resources that we want to talk about, and always try and get help. These are the resources here: the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Veterans Crisis Line, the Crisis Text Line. The Trevor Lifeline is a phenomenal resource. Our numbers for LGBTQ suicides are, well, we all know veterans are the highest. Veterans are at greatest risk, about 22 a day, 23 a day. Different professions slot in there, but law enforcement, firefighters, and correction officers kind of come in between 16 and 18. They come in right behind there. We've seen a big shift in that going up. We've also seen right in that range, right there with that 14 to 16 to 18 range is also the LGBTQ, especially if they're in an unsupportive home. And we heard some of the stories about the difficulties that families were having in life. And we had one person post up a free resource in the chat. I'm all for free resources. You might learn something. And what you might also find out is that you are not alone. And that's a big pushback on stigma. The way you're feeling, the fact that you need help, you're not failing, you're not alone, forgive yourself. Suncoast 211 is a kind of a catch-all number and give you a lot of resources, including to housing and to other things that you might need, food and such. And if we flip over to the next one, we'll talk about our major resources here in Sarasota. Bayside Center for Behavioral Health, which is connected with Sarasota Memorial Hospital, handles children under the ages of 18 and also handles what we call seniors, usually 55 and older or 60 and older. That's not to say exclusive on that. If you have insurance, if you want to go to Bayside, you can go to Bayside, but they are specifically the public providers. So if money is an issue for you and you have a child, your child would go to Bayside. If money is an issue for you and you're a senior, you would go to Bayside. The Christman Stabilization Unit, now First Step Behavioral Services, and the Access Center at Centerstone, all are public providers for adults. That's 18 to whatever on that. And I believe Centerstone also has a child stabilization unit, but I don't have that information for me, but we can make that information available to you if required or if you need it. But again, the main thing that I want to stress for you is that there is help out there. And the more we push back on the stigma, the more we have presentations like this, the more we have conversations and we push back on the stigma to go, hey, if you're not feeling well and you're not feeling good about yourself, that's okay. And we just need to address it and move on. And so I think that that's my last slide there. So I'm going to kick it back over to Giselle, and hopefully I cut that time out and got us back on pace.
You're very good. Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. That was terrific. So now is the time when we can open up for questions and comments from people in the audience. So please, why don't we start? Anybody who has a comment or a question that they would like to raise? Thoughts? Any questions or comments to Annalise or Beth about their experience or? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much to Beth and Annalise for sharing their story. I know how intimidating it can be to do in front of an audience of strangers, and you both did an amazing job of speaking. And thank you so much for doing this for the community. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Any
Tim.
questions people have? Somebody has.
Well, I don't have a question, but I want to say that this is some really good resources. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving us, well, me and insight what it looks like when someone is experiencing those thoughts. I think this was really great, and the resources that you can reach out to and to support them. So yeah, that's what I want to say. This was really, I think this was really good.
Good.
So it will save a lot of people's lives, because I've sit in church where someone was thinking about completing suicide, and they came to church, and I didn't know it until it was close to the end of the service. They said, "Thank you for holding my hand," because they were on their way to go and complete. So this is very serious. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Donna. As Charlie put in the chat, he just put in a comment that this is a stigma-free zone here. So feel free to ask any questions you might have. We really are a very open group, and would love to be able to hear what your thoughts are and respond directly. Antoinette, are you?
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure if it was working. First of all, I want to say to both Annalise and Beth also, thank you so much for having the courage to be able to step out and tell us what happened to you and what your experiences were. Secondly, Charlie, thank you also for further advice. There has been suicide in my family over the years, many years ago, actually now. But what I found interesting tonight was that a nephew called during the time this webinar was taking place. He shared with me about 8 months ago that he was having thoughts of suicide. He had come through brain surgery anyway, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time I knew he was talking to his girlfriend who lives with him. And I asked him to please get back in therapy. I didn't have the conversation that was suggested tonight, but I did ask him to please be more transparent with his family. And I knew he was confiding with the girl he lives with. I haven't heard from him for about 6 or 8 months, but I've had information from family. And tonight he called during this webinar. And my point is that, Charlie, I want to thank you for some information that will help me to really talk with him further tomorrow when I call him, and to get a better sense of where he is at now, because I know he's been in therapy. Anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Antoinette. And Charlie just posted that this is September is National Suicide Prevention Month. So that's this conversation is very, very timely. But at any point in time, if you have any concerns, if you know somebody, or if you're concerned if somebody is feeling suicidal and may hurt themselves, if that person won't call the 800-273-TALK number, which is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, you can call on their behalf. Other times you can offer to call with the person. I know sometimes that has really helped, that let's reach out. I'll be here with you. Let's call together. That's another approach that, that can be helpful. And so and for you to know that a lot of the questions that Charlie put on the screen are the kinds of questions that will be asked when you do call the line. Those are real questions. Those are the kinds of exact questions somebody will be asked. So it's important to know, because people often wonder, what will happen when I call the National Suicide Lifeline, or if I call the Trevor line? What are they going to say? What are they going to do? They're going to ask those very questions because they are going to try to determine the level of risk, as Charlie mentioned, that person is in, and whether or not a 911, call is really the next thing to do. So those are real questions, and never hesitate to either reach out with somebody or on behalf of somebody, or encourage somebody to reach out. I see there's a question posted by Andy that says, to all of you, please help us. I'm adding that. How can we take this conversation to the next level? To go beyond tonight? How do we have this conversation in the community, and any ideas?
Oh, Giselle, may I?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have to say this much is that one of the things that I teach when I teach for my company now, kind of training and consulting, is that we need champions. We need champions. If you look back at the history of mental health funding, which is what we need more of, you know, and we just got the parity acts, but we need champions.
Mm-hmm.
President Kennedy, because he had mental illness in his family, was a champion. His brother would have been a champion, but we know what happened to the Kennedys. Our politicians go with what they feel touched by, what they have experience with. So if you're politically inclined, go and run for office if you've got experience with mental illness. But like me, I'm not politically inclined. So you need to reach out and make sure that you let your community leaders know. That's how Sarasota County commissioners passed a mental health taxing district, because enough people, enough citizens reached out and said, this is a priority. And that's what we need to do. We need to push back on that stigma and not talk about it. We need to talk about it more, and we need to talk about it openly. We need to talk about the real facts, which is that we need to fund this. We need incentives to get more psychiatrists, psychologists, more social workers, more licensed mental health care workers. All of this costs money. All this is tax dollars. But you know what? If it's important, it's important. Let's do it.
Right.
And that's what you need to do, is make sure that at every opportunity you are advocating for some type of advancement of care and push back on that stigma. Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? I see a comment in here by Carrie, and before I read that, is there anybody else who has a thought? Yes.
Hi.
Ben, hi.
Again, I just wanted to offer some just clarification for the support group that I co-facilitate. So NAMI does have the peer-to-peer connections. However, the group that I co-facilitate is specifically for loved ones who have lost someone to suicide, or have a loved one who has attempted suicide, not for those who are struggling with those thoughts themselves. So I just want to add that in there for some clarification.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Beth. And Carrie, if I read Carrie's post to everyone, that Carrie's idea is that maybe her project, which is Facing Mental Illness, I think many of you are familiar with Carrie Seidman's project, and SRQ Strong can coordinate to create a community event. And I mean, I think that's a great idea and something that we should bring to our group. And it may be time we, Sydney's, I just see came back on. We have been working on or getting very close to launching a social media campaign to raise awareness. I mean, I think maybe this is a subject that a few organizations that have the ability to raise questions community-wide, we would be able to get together and collaborate on something. I think that's a great idea, Carrie. And Sydney, you're shaking your head. Do you have anything you'd like to add too?
Well, Andy had kind of asked how we can take this conversation
Right.
beyond tonight. So obviously doing an event would be wonderful, but I wasn't sure if anyone had any other ideas.
Yeah.
I can say
I'm in
go ahead.
California and I'm planning an event. So, but I'm in California
Oh.
and I am planning an event around awareness for this month. So I don't know, would someone like to reach out to me and guide me and support me with that?
And try to connect. I think we definitely could try. Absolutely. Do you want to, okay, we have your contact email? I'm just wondering, Sydney, of our group, or how we could reach out and possibly connect with Donna?
Yeah, Donna, if you registered on Eventbrite, then we will have your email contact
I have,
information.
yeah.
Oh, good.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, terrific. then we'll reach out. Annalise, were you going to say something too?
I was just going to say, it starts in your inner circle.
Mhm.
It took a long time for me to even just open up to my inner circle. My partner who I've been with for 5 years now, it wasn't for a few years before I said anything, because it's really difficult, to break down that stigma within yourself. So I think the more that people start within themselves in their inner circles, that those little pockets will just like slowly mesh together and just make one big bubble of a stigma-free zone, something like that. It starts small. I think we always think, big picture, what can we do to help as many
Right.
people as possible? But I really think sometimes it really starts with yourself and your inner circle, and sometimes it's easier said than done. It took me 15 years, not quite that long, but over that 15 years, it wasn't like I instantly came out of Bayside and was like, okay, I'm happy and I'm healthy now, and I know how to deal with my emotions, and I know coping mechanisms and all that stuff. It's an evolution of sorts, and it really starts with yourself and your inner circle.
Mhm.
And the more people are comfortable about breaking down those walls and barriers and just talking about stuff, because I didn't actually go back to talk therapy. I realized I had kind of like my own circle of friends that we had our own talk therapy, and we still do that to this day. Like, I have my friends that will just have a day where we just like we tell each other, everything that we're feeling on so many different levels: spiritual, emotional, physical, mental. It's it's really powerful what you can do in small numbers, and to watch it grow. I think that's a great starting point. So, if you're here tonight and you have some kind of story about suicide that has impacted you, because we know it affects everyone. If you're not a suicide attempt survivor yourself, you may be a friend or a family member of someone who has attempted it. So maybe this might be a starting point for someone that is watching tonight to say, like, okay, I'm ready to talk about this, or like maybe they're ready to talk about this. Let's talk about this. Let's just start talking. We have really learned through Sarasota Strong how sharing stories can really change people's lives. Not just the people sharing the story, but the people listening, because then they get that courage and that urge to be in that place where that person is and wanting to share all this stuff that they're feeling, because they're realizing that they're not alone. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Annalise. That's terrific advice. And telling the stories are so powerful in so many ways. And as we know, and as you said, the road to recovery isn't quick. It isn't easy. It isn't short. It is kind of forever. Both good and bad, and it's not easy. And I think, all of the questions also that Charlie put out there that to ask, and don't be afraid to ask, and be direct. They're so important, but they're not easy to ask. I can tell you, they're not easy questions. But they're important. You have to have the strength and the courage to ask them, because it's not always that easy. And Charlie's has done this for years, in his job, but I can understand that it could be challenging and difficult, but important. If you can save a life, just think about that, how important that is. So I know we're getting close, Annalise. I know you're the timekeeper, but are there any last question or any comment that anybody would like to make before we kind of wrap up? Well, thank you. I mean, I'm humbled by this past hour and a half's conversation, and by our speakers who shared so much of their souls, their hearts and souls and experience with us to make us all stronger. And I guess that's part of SRQ Strong, right? We help each other get stronger. And I think everybody here tonight, by just joining us, is helping everybody gets stronger, helping to build a stronger community. And I really appreciate it. And Brianna and Charlie and Beth and Elise, you were all so magnificent, so wonderful. I thank you. Thank you all. I'm applauding, so I hope you can hear. And to also to let you know that this has been recorded, so you can actually go onto the Sarasota Strong Facebook page and see it immediately through Facebook Live, or share it with somebody. Even if you don't feel that you want to talk to somebody, if you know somebody or you think they may be in emotional distress, share this video, share this session with them, send them this session and, the link and say, hey, I heard something tonight. You may be interested in this. And so if we can be helpful in that way, please feel free to use the link. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email that'll have the link. If there's somebody you think should be hearing what we have to say tonight, or to know what the resources are, then please share this. So again, thank you. Usually at this point, we announce the next topic for our community forums, but we at SRQ Strong, we're listening, we're taking a page from our playbook, from our mental health and trauma-informed playbook, and we're taking a short break for a few weeks while we plan the topics for the upcoming community forums. So you will be hearing from us, and please send us an email if you have some ideas for a topic that you think would be of interest. Let us know. We always try to plan sessions that are responsive to the community's needs. So please write to us. Check our Facebook. You'll see we have our other activities, though our forum may be taking a break for a month or so. All of our other activities will be going on. We put up Helen Elise Healing Group. It's a fabulous group. So please check that out and spread the word. It's you can get the information on our webpage. Our Aging and Resilient work group meets monthly, and they're planning all sorts of activities for the fall and winter. So if you have an interest in aging and resilience, check our webpage, join that committee. And know that you won't hear from us for about a month or so, but we're still there, and we're still SRQ Strong, and we're still building a strong community. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it on behalf of everybody at SRQ Strong. Thank you. So I'll say good night to everybody.
Thank you guys. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
Bye. Bye.